Committee will come to order. Witnesses will take their seats. The title of today's subcommittee hearing is Allegations of Discrimination and Retaliation within the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Part 2. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any time, and without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the Chair for inclusion in the record. The Chair will now recognize himself for 5 minutes for the purposes of an opening statement. On March 6 of this year, the American Banker published an article titled, CFPB Staff Evaluations Show Sharp Racial Disparities. The article exposed serious personnel problems at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, including the evidence that the, quote, CFPB's own managers have shown distinctly different patterns in how they rate employees of different races. It's now apparent that the CFPB was aware of the racial disparities in key metrics well before the March 6th American Banker article. A study on diversity and inclusion commissioned by the Bureau and conducted by Deloitte Consulting was provided to the Bureau in September of 2013. That study noted sharp racial disparities in performance ratings, pay, hiring, and other areas. In addition to racial disparities in the CFPB's performance reviews, the American Banker also reported that the, quote, management has been accused in several cases of favoring Caucasian men and of creating a hostile work environment, end quote. The article noted that the CFPB's employees had filed 115 official grievances with the National Treasury Employees Union, their union at the CFPB, and over 85 informal complaints, most of which pertain to allegations of unequal pay and raised questions about the recent performance reviews. These findings are particularly troubling as the Bureau, in its role as policeman of the consumer credit markets, has embraced a disparate impact theory, under which lenders can be held liable if their practices have a disparate impact on members of protected classes, even in the absence of direct evidence of racial discrimination. If the CFPB were a private company, the mere existence of disparities in key metrics relating to its treatment of employees would be ample grounds for enhanced supervision and costly enforcement actions. Now, at the Bureau, we have both examples of disparate impact and actual real cases of discrimination and retaliation. On April 2nd of this year, the subcommittee held a hearing which addressed these allegations of discrimination and retaliation at the Bureau and featured the testimony of Ms. Angela Martin, a current CFPB employee and whistleblower, and Ms. Misty Ryuchi, an investigator hired by the Bureau to examine Ms. Martin's claims of retaliation. Also invited to the hearing that day were 3 individuals with key roles in the union grievance and workplace complaint process. Unfortunately, the Bureau and the union refused to make these witnesses available. Only under force of subpoena are 2 of the 3 witnesses here today. I would note for the witnesses, it was a bipartisan, unanimous vote of this subcommittee to issue these subpoenas. Lisa Strong serves as in the Bureau as a lead employee relations manager. All formal and informal workplace complaints are processed through Ms. Strong's office. In addition, Ms. Strong negotiates on behalf of the Bureau with the union on changes to workplace conditions as part of the collective bargaining process. Ben Knopp serves as the Executive Vice President of the union and is the highest-ranking union official who actually works within the Bureau headquarters here in Washington. Mr. Knopp has represented the union in negotiations with Ms. Strong on workplace conditions as well as disputes regarding the Bureau's troubled performance management review systems. The fact is that discrimination on the basis of race, sex, or other prohibitive factors is destructive, morally repugnant, and against the law. All government agencies, including the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, must continue to combat discrimination in employment and punish those responsible for discrimination. And yet, during my time in Congress, I've never witnessed this much of an outpouring from any one agency, or actually any agency added up across the government, in terms of the number of employee complaints we've seen and calls that we've had to talk about these conditions. Nevertheless, I join my colleagues in announcing to all employees of agencies under the jurisdiction of this committee who are experiencing discrimination or fear of retaliation at the hands of their supervisors to reach out to this committee. It should be recognized, in the past few days, the Bureau has announced changes to their employee performance system that revealed, quote, broad-based, end quote, statistical disparities in the employment ratings system. In fact, Director Cordray reached out to me personally and called me to inform me of the changes and acknowledge the role that the public attention and congressional oversight played in the Bureau's decision to make adjustments to the performance management system, however inadequate they are. While the CFPB's funding and structure afford Congress an extremely limited ability to influence the Bureau's operations and policies, the allegations of discrimination and retaliation at the Bureau further underscore the significant need for real congressional oversight of this Bureau. It's my hope that through today's testimony we'll gain a better understanding of the issues of discrimination laid out in the American Banker article and the Deloitte report, as well as the day-to-day handling of employee grievance and complaints. And with that, I'll now yield 6 minutes to the ranking member of the full committee. I'm sorry. Well, that's the ranking member just informed me they'd like additional time, so I'll yield 5 minutes to the ranking member of the full committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Today, we hear the testimony of 2 subpoenaed witnesses regarding allegations of discrimination and retaliation at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Mr. Chairman, I again want to thank you for your interest in addressing discrimination issues at the CFPB. And I want to reiterate my sincere hope that you will commit to addressing similar issues that may be occurring in the private sector and at all of our federal financial regulators with the same due diligence as you have at the CFPB. As you know, Subcommittee Democrats have called on the Inspectors General at all of the financial regulators under our committee's jurisdiction to assess whether any personnel practices and policies within these agencies have created an unfair or discriminatory workplace for minorities and women. Since our last hearing, my staff has had productive conversations with staff from the offices of the Inspectors General discussing the scope of this review and the use of uniform criteria to ensure their investigations are conducted in a thorough, meaningful, and consistent manner. Mr. Chairman, once they have completed, I certainly hope you will join us in using the full weight of this committee to take a close look at the findings of and any recommendations from the Inspectors General. However, I remain disappointed that pay disparities among a wide range of classifications occurred at the Bureau, as was outlined in a report that CFPB released on Monday. It is good that the CFPB is taking steps to try and achieve a fair, inclusive workplace by, among other things, ensuring a more direct, ongoing interaction between the CFPB's Office of Minority and Women Inclusion, or OMWI, and the Director's Office. I'm so pleased that CFPB is engaging in negotiations with the National Treasury Employees Union to develop a new employee evaluation system that will address these pay disparities and compensate employees. I'm hoping that today's witnesses will shed additional light on the inner operations of the CFPB. But as I and Ranking Member Green wrote to you over a month and a half ago, I remain interested in hearing from the Bureau's top leadership. The CFPB has offered both Director Richard Cordray and the head of its OMWI, Stuart Ishimaru, to testify before the committee as has the national president of the NTEU. To date, they have not been invited to discuss this issue before the committee, despite the fact that the Bureau's senior leader
I have significant experience in the federal government personnel matters. I am appearing today to make this brief statement and to answer your questions pursuant to the subcommittee subpoena dated May 8, 2014. It has been and continues to be my pleasure to work as a public servant. In particular, I am proud of the work of the Bureau is doing to protect American consumers. I believe the Bureau's mission to make markets for consumer financial products and services functional and safe is very important. That is why I am deeply troubled by allegations about discrimination at the Bureau. On March 6, 2014, the American Banker published an article alleging racial disparities in the Bureau's performance evaluations. Additionally, on April 2nd, this subcommittee heard testimony from Ms. Angela Martin, a Bureau employee, and Ms. Misty Rauchi, a contractor, alleging discrimination. Those allegations are not consistent with what I have observed during my time at the Bureau. The performance review information reported by the American Banker was compiled by the Bureau at the request of the National Treasury Employees Union, the union that represents the Bureau employees. It is part of my job to facilitate responses to NTU's requests for information, which I did in this case. It is not part of my job to actually collect the information or evaluate or assess the data requested. Instead, my office serves as a conduit for the request. Although I have not been involved in the Bureau's assessment of the data, I am aware that the Bureau was analyzing the performance review information for signs of disparate impact even before the American Banker published its story. I do not have a role in addressing any performance review process issues that may have occurred in the past. My role in revising the performance review process is limited to helping negotiate the Bureau's collective bargaining agreement with the NTEU going forward. In that context, Director Richard Cordray asked me to facilitate an open dialogue with the NTEU about its vision for performance management, which I have done. During recent contract negotiations, the NTEU presented its own plan for the performance review process, which the Bureau has now accepted. Our cooperative efforts with the NTEU will continue through a working group focused on ensuring that the performance review process at the Bureau is fair and effective. In addition to working with the NTEU, I also manage investigations of individual employee grievances. Employee grievances are separate from EEO complaints, which are handled by a different office. My office is currently handling numerous employee grievances. The grievances involve a variety of issues, with a relatively small number alleging any sort of discrimination. We take all grievances very seriously and fully investigate each one. Angela Martin's grievance was no different. When Ms. Martin first alleged mistreatment by one of her peers, my office undertook a thorough investigation that included numerous interviews and the collection of signed statements. We did not find evidence to corroborate Ms. Martin's allegations, but still took a number of proactive steps to address Ms. Martin's concerns. These included providing a coach for Ms. Martin's coworker, which he readily accepted, recommending roles and responsibilities be clarified, and encouraging Ms. Martin and her coworker to engage in mediation. While Ms. Martin's coworker was willing to engage in mediation, it is my understanding that Ms. Martin declined that opportunity. Meanwhile, 2 of Ms. Martin's direct reports raised serious concerns about Ms. Martin's management style. They complained of abuse that justified their temporary reassignment to another supervisor. When Ms. Martin alleged retaliation by her manager, in part because 2 of her reports were temporarily reassigned, we took that complaint equally seriously. I engaged with what I thought at the time was a competent, independent third party to investigate Ms. Martin's retaliation claims, the Defense Investigators Group. What I received in return from DIG and Ms. Rauchi specifically was an incomplete work product that did not meet the goals set forth in DIG's own statement of work. Ms. Rauchi's investigation did not meet even minimal standards. For example, she failed to obtain signed statements from the people she interviewed, did not provide Ms. Martin's supervisor a full opportunity to respond to the allegations made against him, and did not provide sufficient documentation to support her conclusions. The president of DIG, Misty Rauchi's supervisor, conceded that Ms. Rauchi's work was unacceptable and in many ways did not address the allegations she was supposed to investigate. After giving Ms. Rauchi a second chance to correct the issues, I received a second investigative report that was no better than the first one. Ms. Rauchi and DIG failed to address any of the problems with the previous report. The Bureau is working to fill in the gaps left by the DIG report. Throughout this time, the Bureau worked very hard to accommodate Ms. Martin's demands. In addition to paying Ms. Martin a monetary settlement on at least 2 occasions, the Bureau essentially created positions for her in 2 different divisions at the same pay and grade. We put significant effort into designing each position according to Ms. Martin's specifications. She declined one of them outright and is now dissatisfied with the other. I feel that the Bureau went to great lengths to help Ms. Martin get to a place where she could be happy and productive. For nearly a year and a half, I kept an open-door policy with respect to Ms. Martin and always made myself available to assist her however I could. I have never witnessed management be anything but professional and accommodating to her. I was surprised when during the April 2nd hearing it was alleged that I attempted to influence DIG's conclusions. I have never done that, and in fact, this allegation does not make sense. Had I wanted to predetermine the outcome of the investigation, I would not have outsourced it. Although these allegations against me are not true, in order to maintain the integrity of the investigation into Ms. Martin's claims, I recused myself after the April 2nd hearing and turned over my investigation file to a coworker. I am no longer involved, but it is my understanding that the investigation remains ongoing. As a woman and as a minority, I am sensitive to issues that have been raised about discrimination at the Bureau, but I honestly believe that the Bureau cares about treating its employees fairly. I know I do. My team and I work very hard to give each grievance the attention it requires to achieve a good and just outcome for everyone involved. I also know that the Bureau is taking these allegations very seriously. The Bureau is focused on correcting any problems that may have occurred in the past and is dedicated to preventing any discrimination, either intentional or unintentional, in the future. In addition to the previous submission and supporting documentation I provided to the subcommittee, I look forward to the opportunity today to deliver a more complete picture of the issues. I am happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Mr. Knopp, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank the committee for taking the time to examine the important issues of race and gender discrimination, as well as other issues of equality, which are a problem not only at the CFPB, but throughout our society. For the last 3 years at the CFPB, I have served as an enforcement attorney in the Office of Supervision, Enforcement, and Fair Lending. I'm honored to enforce our nation's laws with a group of talented, hardworking, and passionate colleagues who dedicate their professional lives to fighting for fairness in the financial marketplace. In late 2012, I also helped organize a chapter of the National Treasury Employees Union at the CFPB. In May of 2013, workers voted overwhelmingly for the union, with 80% of those casting ballots voting in favor of organizing. Shortly after the election, I was asked by NTU's national representative to serve as the interim executive vice president of the chapter and was eventually elected by our members to that position for a 2-year term. As the executive vice president, I represented the chapter in negotiations for our 2013 pay, advocated for dozens of employees in grievances and EEO proceedings, and currently serve on the bargaining committee charged with negotiating the first collective bargaining agreement in the Bureau's history. During my time at the Bureau, I've witnessed great accomplishments by our unionized workforce. For example, members in enforcement have led cases that resulted in $3.5 billion being returned to American consumers. Union members in supervision have traveled thousands of miles every week to ensure that banks and other financial institutions are following the law. Members of consumer response have overcome significant obstacles to staff a robust complaint system that helps give the American consumer a fair shake. And union members in fair lending have made sure that financial institutions throughout our nation are held accountable if they discriminate on impermissible factors like race and gender. Unfortunately, I've also witnessed Bureau management struggle at times to live up to the mission, ideals, and achievements of the CFPB as a whole, notably in regards to performance management review. PMR ratings are vitally important for our workers, as they determine pay raises, bonuses, and make up the permanent employee record that is relied upon by the Bureau to award promotions and other benefits. These ratings can also be accessed by potential future employers when former Bureau members apply for a job outside the agency. In August and early September of 2013, just weeks after the union was recognized, the chapter asked for and was given the 2012 PMR ratings distribution between labor and management. The 2012 data that we requested revealed managers were far more likely to receive the highest ratings and less likely to receive the lowest ratings than bargaining unit employees. To me, this seemed like managers were, in essence, receiving Coach of the Year awards, while their employees had only a mediocre winning percentage. I, along with other members of the bargaining team, repeatedly raised these fairness concerns during September of 2013 and were assured by management that these inequities would be remedied. Sadly, this was not the case. In November 2013, employees were given their new PMR rating for the preceding year, after which our fledgling chapter was overwhelmed with members seeking to file grievances over their ratings. Several chapter stewards and board members observed that the bulk of potential grievances were being reported by minority and female employees. In addition, it appeared that employees over 40 years of age were also adversely impacted by the rating system. In response to our members' concerns, the chapter filed a comprehensive information request on November 22, 2013, seeking from management a detailed PMR breakdown by categories such as race, gender, age, and bargaining unit status. It was this request and the agency's response to it nearly 2 months later in mid-January that I believe has led to this hearing today. The 2013 ratings showed marked disparities for minority employees. For example, a white employee was twice as likely to receive the highest rating at the Bureau as compared to a black or Hispanic employee. The odds were similarly stacked against workers over 40, and ratings continued to be badly skewed in favor of management when compared with the ratings of the bargaining unit, who do the bulk of the work at the Bureau. Immediately upon receiving this data on January 15, 2014, our chapter's leadership made our members aware of these troubling disparities and called on management to make wholesale changes in PMR going forward while compensating those who were adversely affected in the past. In response, management was largely silent. We then entered into collective bargaining negotiations in late January. Throughout the first several months of bargaining, the union raised these issues with management representatives sitting across the table and called on them to discard the current system. And once again, surprisingly, management refused to acknowledge the documented unfairness in the system and instead defended PMR. In fact, at one point during negotiations, a management representative asked me unironically whether, by advocating for a new rating system, I, quote, did not believe in a meritocracy, unquote. While the chapter was raising PMR issues through grievances and bargaining, we also pursued approximately 15 pay equity grievances. In these filings, we alleged that women and minority employees were being underpaid when compared to similarly situated white male colleagues. To date, the Bureau has denied each of these grievances at all stages, often using inconsistent reasoning, despite what I feel is convincing evidence of low pay for numerous women and minority workers. In the last several weeks, however, there does appear to be recognition by management that we ought to be doing better as a Bureau. For example, we recently reached a tentative agreement on a new PMR system that, in large part, accepts the union's proposal and scraps the system that yielded the disparities. In addition, just days before this hearing, Director Cordray issued an important directive for the first time acknowledging that, quote, there were broad-based disparities in the way performance ratings were assigned across our employee base in both 2012 and 2013, unquote. He confirmed the union's belief that, quote, these differences indicate a systemic disadvantage to various categories of employees that persisted across divisions, offices, and other employee characteristics, unquote. In particular, Director Cordray agreed with the union findings that there was, quote, broad-based statistically significant disparity in many areas, including race, ethnicity, age, and bargaining unit membership eligibility. As a result of this directive, which retroactively compensates the majority of employees harmed by the PMR system, it appears that the Bureau has made a solid first step in the process of holding itself accountable. This is what the Bureau is in the business of doing in the financial marketplace, and that is all the union has asked of Bureau management since our chapter's inception. I look forward to a productive discussion on these and other important issues at the CFPB. Thank you.
I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Knopp, on Monday, Director Cordray outlined some remedial measures to address alleged discrimination against women and minorities of the Bureau. You're familiar with that?
Yes.
As you said in your statement.
Yes.
So what is the union's position on these remedial measures that the Director has taken?
I think it's a productive first step. We were pleased to see acknowledgement of the positions that we'd been advocating for close to a year at this point in some cases. We think there is more work to be done, certainly, and we look forward to continuing to engage the Director and all interested parties in making sure the entire system.
Has your union filed, is your union planning to file grievances?
I believe actually a mass grievance was filed. It came out of the national office, so I am less familiar with it. But it did allege that there were certain other steps to remediate the problem that needed to be taken care of, in essence, scrubbing people's record of the previous.
So the union requested a report on the CFPB's 2013 performance reviews. When did you do that?
We did that in November 22nd, 2000.
Okay. So when did the union receive the report?
It would probably have been January 14th, 2014.
Okay. And why was the report requested?
We felt that it appeared anecdotally that a large amount of people coming to us with questions and concerns and serious issues with their ratings were minorities or those over 40 and women as well.
So when you received this report, when the union received this report in January, until March 5th, the day before the American Banker published these reports of alleged discrimination and retaliation within the Bureau, what happened with the union's negotiations about this matter?
Well, we engaged in a good 2 months of pretty hard-nosed negotiations, and there was a lot of resistance to changing.
Did that resistance change after the American Banker article?
I believe it certainly softened at that point.
Okay. So let me ask you another question. The CFPB received a report from Deloitte Consulting in September of last year, which documented sharp racial disparities and gender disparities as well, not only in performance reviews, but also with pay, hiring, promotions, and a number of other areas. Are you familiar with this report, which is right before you?
Yeah, I became familiar with it yesterday after it was reported.
Yesterday.
Yeah, yes.
So, Ms. Strong, about this report, in September of last year, Deloitte provided this report at the Bureau's behest and found, quote, Asians and whites are being deemed most qualified at higher ratings per applicant than other remaining minority groups, and Asians and whites are being hired at more than double the rate of other ethnic categories. So why did the CFPB continue to defend its performance ratings system when they had such a damning report from a revered consulting firm?
So first of all, I have not read this report. I vaguely remember being interviewed for it about a year and a half ago.
Were you provided the report?
No. So I wouldn't be able to speak to the content of that report. I wouldn't be the appropriate person. I do not oversee our hiring process. There's another lead that is responsible.
But you're the
for
lead
that.
negotiator with the union about the contents of this report. So, Mr. Knopp, would have been helpful for the union to have this Deloitte report, considering you asked for a report, an investigation, 2 months after the Bureau received this report. Would that have been helpful in this process?
This report would have certainly informed our negotiations in 2013 over pay. It would have informed our negotiations this year over pay and PMR system, and also, obviously, it would have informed our grievance postures and positions. Yes.
So not only does the Deloitte report, but also the internal CFPB report that the union requested
analysis and information had been presented, and you're not aware of this?
I'm not. And maybe what she's referring to is the director asked Stuart Ishimaru, who's the head of the OMWI office, to conduct listening sessions. So maybe that's what she's referring to.
Mr. Knopp, let me ask you this question. I think you've already testified that you thought that there were distinct different patterns in how employees were rated based on race. Is that correct? Is that an accurate interpretation, sir?
Yes, the numbers certainly support that.
The numbers. Do you have any reason to believe that rating an employee on a scale of 1 to 5 is somehow too complicated or too sophisticated for CFPB managers to understand?
I think we have a lot of smart managers who could probably theoretically understand how to apply a number rating, yes.
This is not an automated system, is that right?
No, far from that.
It's not an automated system. The statistics the CFPB used in its analysis are based on the ratings that actual managers assign to their employees. Is that correct?
Yes.
This isn't a systematic thing. This is a subjective, arbitrary. Is that how you would characterize it?
In most positions at the Bureau, I think it's fair to say this rating has to be subjective by the nature of the people's work that are being rated.
So it's not systematic. If the ultimately comes from the decision made by the CFPB manager, it stands to reason that any systematic discrimination observed in compiling the individual ratings can be tracked back to the managers. Is that correct?
Managers were certainly the ones that made the ratings.
They actually made the ratings.
All on them.
Does it strike you odd that Director Cordray would blame the system for this, then?
I think there's more than enough blame to go around, but I certainly think managers deserve their fair share as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Ms. Strong, in your experience, is it true that the CFPB managers have shown distinctly different patterns in how they rate employees of different races?
Not based on my observations.
Not based on your observation, really, just based on the reporting, I suppose. Which CFPB managers gave CFPB employees ratings of 1s and 2s using the discriminatory performance rating system? Ms. Strong.
Which managers?
Which ones? Names.
I mean, I couldn't give you the names. There were a handful of employees whose performance was determined to be unacceptable or minimally acceptable, but I couldn't give you the names right
Perhaps you can provide those to the committee.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Ms. Knopp, to clarify the record, when did you have knowledge that the Deloitte report had been completed? I'm sorry, Ms. Strong. Ms. Strong.
Honestly, this is the first time I've seen this report.
Have you heard that the report was complete?
Not that I can recall.
Have you been asked about the report?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, now we'll go to Ms. Beatty for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Green, and to our witnesses. Thank you for being here. We know that this is a difficult time for all of us. But one of the things I want to focus on a little more is from the information that we got from the American Banker's article, which is in part why we are discussing this. That article, which cited primarily findings from an internal bureau analysis, as I'm sure you've discussed, that it was alleged that the reviews were being given in a manner that it was more likely to award higher ratings to white males than to their minority or female counterparts. And much of that was based on performance ratings that was directly linked to each employee's ability to receive raises or bonuses and or promotions, as we have heard. Therefore, it would seem like a performance review system, which is skewed in favor of one group, clearly has a disparate impact on the non-favorite groups. In fact, if in the final analysis, the Bureau found that the distribution of high rating marks was impacted not only by race and gender, but also by age and location as well. So as a result of these obvious disparate impact performance reviews, the Bureau has, as I understand, recently undertaken to compensate aggrieved personnel and to reform the system by which performance reviews are connected. So my question to you would be, can you discuss or explain to us the system of performance review that was in place up until last week, and how were these employees evaluated, and what were the criteria used?
So again, I'm not the lead over the performance management program, but I can speak generally to it. It was a 5-level system, and employees were rated on individual objectives that were created in collaboration between the manager and the employee. And then also on a set of competencies, which they were the same competencies applied to employees at the same grade level, and then the same set of competencies that applied to managers.
So by you using the term the same for managers, are you of the opinion that there was a clear and uniform method by which the evaluations could be made on an equal basis?
I would say that the performance management system that we had in place prior to our negotiations with the union is not very different than the performance management programs that are in place in other agencies. So pretty common or standard that employees have individual objectives and then are also assessed on competencies.
So if in fact the reviews were that, do you have any helpful information to us that how do we have the reviews and then get to the disparate treatment if it's equal, if it's for me being female and African American, and then for maybe my white counterparts? What makes the disparity?
So unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to help you there. I don't think I'm the right person. I was not part of the group that assessed that data. I know that the director would be happy to come and talk to you about that assessment. I just was not part of it.
But you are comfortable that someone made an assessment which may have been a little more subjective than objective if the standards were the same? And you're nodding, so you can feel free, Mr. Kopp, to respond.
Yeah, the system is subjective from the very start because in most areas of the Bureau, the first step in the review is actually the person being reviewed has to, in essence, brag about how well they did that last year. So if someone's really good at talking themselves up, they might get a better rating. If someone is a more humble or has a different way of communicating, that actually will hurt them going forward because what's evaluated in large part is the personal statement. That sort of starts the process. So to me, the process was flawed from the beginning. It's extremely convoluted. You probably need another hearing just to try and figure out exactly what was going on. I mean, managers spent a good month away from their substantive work trying to do this, and it still turned out rather flawed. So it's just a bad system.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
We'll now go to Mr. Duffy. Mr. Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Knopp, the American Banker article from March 6, 2014 stated employees have filed 115 official grievances with the National Treasury Employees Union since last August. If unofficial complaints that haven't yet worked their way through this system are included, that number exceeds 200, according to information obtained by the American Banker. Are those statements correct?
I think those are certainly within the ballpark. I'd have to go back and check, but it sounds about right.
Are you surprised by the volume of the official and unofficial grievances?
I think it is an extremely large volume for a relatively small agency, yes.
So you would agree that the volume of complaints is unusual?
Very unusual.
Now, you testified, I think, in your written testimony and also orally that the vote to organize was 80%. Was the margin by which CFPB employees voted to have a union represent their interests, was that margin unusual?
I was told by folks at NTU National that was one of the higher margins they'd ever seen.
Ms. Strong, do you dispute the figures cited in the March 6, 2014 American Banker article that over 200 complaints have been filed by the CFPB's employee union from the period of August 2013 through March?
According to my count, we have had 137 grievances to date filed by NTEU.
137.
Correct.
Does that include unofficial complaints?
The union sometimes asks us to do inquiries, and I think they're not technically an informal grievance, so there may be more than that, but officially filed grievances, there have been 137.
So is there again, the American Banker article talked about official grievances, but then it also talked about unofficial complaints. Do you have a process set up for unofficial complaints?
I guess I would call them like requests. So
and how many requests have you? How many requests would you have received in that time period?
I'm not sure.
Has your office resolved all this 137 complaint? Are there still outstanding complaints?
So we have pending settlement, or have actually settled 50 of the 137, and most of them are still in process.
How long will it take to resolve those outstanding complaints?
The entire process takes about 110 days.
Now, some of those complaints were filed over 10 months ago.
Some of them what? I'm sorry.
Some of those complaints were filed over 10 months ago.
It could be. Because of the large volume of grievances that we've received, we have passed our deadlines. But I will also say that the union has requested extensions during different phases of the grievance procedure, and we have granted those as well.
Now, do you expect that all these complaints will be resolved 110 days from now?
Well, they're different at different times in the process, but our goal is always to resolve them within the timeframes that we agreed upon within TEU.
But that has not been happening, is that correct?
A very small percentage of them have exceeded the deadlines.
Are any of the outstanding complaints active since last August that you're aware of?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Outstanding since last August?
Yes. Are there
Not
still
that I'm
unresolved?
aware of. There are a set of grievances that are getting ready to go to arbitration.
And how old are they? And what's the oldest one?
You know, I don't know what the oldest one is.
Could be as old as last August?
Could be.
How do you respond to employees who have now waited since last August, nearly a year, for their grievances related to discriminatory pay and performance ratings to be resolved?
So I would just say that we take each and every grievance very seriously and thoroughly investigate it and work through the process. We did receive a larger amount of grievances than we expected. We've recently been allowed to fill additional slots within my team. So we are working as quickly as we can.
Are all persons of authority, Ms. Strong, within the CFPB held to the same standard of accountability?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Well, have you reviewed the 2012 PMR data, which shows that managers consistently rated themselves more highly than non-managers?
No.
So the CFB has not responded when it discovered in 2013 that managers were rating themselves more highly than their own staff? Or has the CFPB responded to that?
I believe the CFPB has responded to that, yes.
And what has the CFPB done?
So it is my understanding that the director has decided to compensate all employees as though they were rated as in the highest rating.
Thank you.
We'll now recognize Mr. Horsford for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the ranking member. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. And like many of my colleagues, I take the issue of discrimination in the workplace very seriously, whether it may be happening at the CFPB or any other federal agency or entity outside of the federal government. An unfair discriminatory workplace, whether it be for minorities, women, or based on someone's sexual orientation, should not be tolerated. I am interested in learning more about the severity of the issue and how it is being handled internally. I had hoped for senior management to be here representing the CFPB, but I want to thank Ms. Strong for appearing today. Ms. Strong, your testimony stated that you are responsible for managing the investigations of individual employee grievances.
That's correct.
Can you discuss the process that you go through in conducting the investigations to substantiate the validity of discrimination or retaliation that come to your attention?
Absolutely. So if a grievance alleges discrimination, then we interview the manager and determine if there was an independent, legitimate business reason for the decision they made. So, for example, in a performance grievance, if the manager is able to articulate and document the reason that they issued the performance rating, then we find that that is evidence that there's no discrimination.
And in the case of Ms. Martin, which I don't want to harp on only because it's one individual and it's an entire agency, but I do want to get an understanding of the process. After you made the determination, was Ms. Martin permitted the opportunity to appeal your office's decision? And if so, what was that process?
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're maybe talking about an allegation that Ms. Martin made against her peer. We, in my office, investigated that, and we did not substantiate that a hostile work environment existed. But Ms. Martin then filed an EEO complaint, which is in a different office, and went through that process. And ultimately, go ahead.
I understand the EEOC process as an alternative.
Right.
Does she have the right to appeal your decision that there was not a substantiated grievance?
So the purpose of my investigation is different than the purpose of an EEO investigation. My investigation is to determine if any misconduct took place. So if the person that she was making the allegation against did engage in some inappropriate behavior, my office would make recommendations on the appropriate action to take. So my office isn't in charge, like the EEO office, of determining or finding of discrimination.
Okay. So I want to turn to the other witness and understand again the fact that the Bureau and the National Treasurers Employees Union reached this collective bargaining tentative agreement that involved the Bureau discontinuing the use of its previous performance management system. So does the agreement going forward address how the Bureau will handle employees who have been part of this problem previously, based on where you're going forward with the new performance review model?
Well, I think Director Cordray's memorandum on Monday addresses past wrongs to some extent, not completely. The agreement we reach going forward changes the system to hopefully rid it of some of its discriminatory impact, but it's going to take constant supervision, constant leadership from the top of the Bureau on down, and constant monitoring from the union to make sure that happens, because it's a very difficult process to keep fair.
Yeah, and I just want to end with your last statement, because you had said earlier in your testimony that there were systematic and structural factors that contributed to the disparity in pay, hiring, and an evaluation of promotion. And so I know some of my colleagues on the other side were very they were very argumentative in asking, why is this systematic? It's systematic because the data substantiates the fact that women and minorities were treated in disparate ways, and that was done in a systematic and structural way. And that has to be addressed in a systematic and structural way. So I'm looking forward to seeing the results of this new performance management system. I know that the ranking member and the other members of this committee will continue to pursue this, not just for the CFPB, but for any other federal agency, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle so that we can end racial discrimination wherever it may exist.
Mr. Barr is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Knopp, you said that you had not reviewed the Deloitte report until yesterday. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you, on behalf of the union, requested information related to performance review disparities. And when, on the timeline here, when did you request that on behalf of the union?
I think we made two separate requests. One would have been in early September of 2013. That was in the context of the 2013 pay negotiations. And then we made another request November 22nd 2013 following that year's PMR ratings, and that is the request that yielded the data cited in the American Bank article.
So just to be clear, you represent the union with respect to negotiations. You were aware of pay equity disparities, and you became aware of those pay equity disparities eventually when?
Well, we were aware that there was a disparity between the bargaining unit and the managers in September of 2013. We were aware that it extended to race and age in January of 2014.
Okay, and race and you became aware of race and age disparities in January of 2014, correct?
And the continued disparity between bargaining unit and non-bargaining unit.
Right, but you had requested the information relating to race and gender discrimination in September, then again November. Is that correct?
November, we requested specifically the race data. In September, all we requested was the bargaining unit, non-bargaining unit data.
Okay. Then finally, when the CFPB did provide you with a report on the information substantiating the race and gender discrimination, again, that was in January of 2014, correct?
The January report substantiated race, age, and bargaining unit, non-bargaining unit. I do not believe it found, in the PMR context, a gender discrimination. We've had gender discrimination issues in the pay equity grievance context, which is separate.
Right, and now you have now been made aware that CFPB was in possession of a Deloitte report in September of 2013 that found sharp racial disparities in performance ratings, pay, hiring, and other measures, that the Bureau had that in its possession, that report revealed disparities in performance rating, in employee pay, and in hiring, that you requested information relating that in September, but certainly November. You were provided a report from the CFPB in January, and in that report, the Deloitte information, the Deloitte conclusions were not disclosed to the union. Is that correct?
The first time I heard of the Deloitte conclusion was yesterday.
And so are you surprised that the Bureau, after multiple requests of information, failed to disclose to you the Deloitte information that the Bureau had in its possession, that you had requested on multiple occasions, and that they apparently deliberately withheld in January of 2014?
Well, I think sort of a duty of good faith bargaining, and if we really wanted to have a collaborative relationship with management, they ought to have disclosed this to us. I think, though, our actual information requests may not have covered the Deloitte study because we didn't know it was there, so we didn't know to ask for it.
Right, but
we asked for the underlying data.
You asked for information relating to disparities.
Certainly.
The Deloitte report contained information relating to those disparities, and the Bureau did not disclose information that you had requested.
That's true, and it's disappointing, and it actually substantively hurts because we could have used the Deloitte report in our negotiations and also in defending people or representing people in grievances that were harmed.
Let me just quickly move to Ms. Strong. Ms. Strong, you testified in your opening statement that you were aware that the Bureau was analyzing the performance review information for signs of disparate impact even before the American Banker published its story.
That's correct, for 2013 performance.
For 2013, but you were unaware, you did not review the Deloitte consulting report, and you still haven't. Is that right?
I believe this covers the prior performance year, not 2013, which is the year in question here.
But you were interviewed for that report.
I was interviewed for that report, yes.
So you had knowledge that it was happening and that it existed. Although you haven't reviewed it, you knew about it.
I didn't know what the purpose of the report was. I was just asked two questions.
And again, finally, Ms. Strong, your title is the Lead of Employee Relations.
The Lead of Labor and Employee Relations.
Labor of Employee Relations, and you did not look, you were not interested in finding out what the Deloitte report might have said in September. You didn't look, and the union is requesting information related to that report, and you deliberately didn't. You weren't curious that this Deloitte information was out there as the Lead of Employee Relations?
I didn't know it was out there. It was conducted by an office that's completely outside of mine.
And so you were just totally uninterested what the Deloitte report might have
If I knew it
revealed.
was there, I would have been interested, but I didn't know it existed.
Yield back.
The ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Green of Texas, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In his absence, I would like to compliment our newest member to our subcommittee, Mr. Horsford. I believe this was his first opportunity to participate in questioning. Let me start with the basic premise that there are many reasons for having this hearing. My concern is whether or not there are some people who will use or attempt to use information acquired at this hearing to weaken, emasculate, or possibly eviscerate the CFPB. So let me start with our union representative. Would you have anything that you have said today be utilized to weaken or eviscerate in some way or emasculate the CFPB?
I actually hope this hearing will strengthen the CFPB by remedying these problems and making us a better, more compassionate place.
How large is your union? You mentioned another aspect of it. How large is your union?
The bargaining unit is give or take 1,000, 1,100 probably right now.
How many agencies do you find yourselves?
I'm just talking about the chapter. I think the NTU as a whole is about 70,000.
And how many agencies are you located in?
Well, our chapter is just the CFPB, but the NTU has dozens and dozens of agencies, yes.
Any other agencies that might come under the purview of this committee? For example,
yes.
Thank you. Is it with those agencies that come under the purview of this committee, will your union provide similar information concerning your issues to my office?
I would just say in this case, the vast amount of sort of momentum for this inquiry was undertaken by the chapter and not the national, and I represent the chapter, so I would hope the national would take this and sort of move the ball forward in other areas. But what you're talking about today was largely driven by the local.
I understand.
Yeah.
You've indicated that you believe that some of these problems are endemic in society. You've indicated that you believe that they are associated with other agencies. Would you have similar circumstances be treated similarly? Meaning, if there's something happening in another agency that an OMWI has some authority to look into, would you have similar circumstances be treated similarly? Would you want other agencies to receive the same scrutiny that the CFPB is receiving?
Of course.
And sometimes where you are is important. It's always important. But equally as important can be the direction that you're moving in. I've looked at your comments, your statement, and on the very last page, you indicate that there's some compensation that's taking place, and you indicate that this is a solid first step. Am I to assume from this comment that you believe this is a good remedy?
It's a partial remedy.
Partial remedy, but as to this part of the partial remedy, do you believe this is a good remedy?
There needs to be a couple additional aspects of it to protect people who got the lowest ratings. They don't come under this. And to also, as the national filed a mass grievance, to erase the numbers from people's ratings. So I think those two prongs, in addition to what the director issued on Monday, it would certainly.
Let me ask you another way. Would you have this part of it eliminated from the process? Is this something we should keep, what you've indicated here, as a good first step? You don't want to eliminate the good first step?
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay,
We're very
so you
happy.
believe that
Yes.
this is a good thing?
Of course, yes.
You also indicate that there's a tentative agreement on a new PMR system that you've had an opportunity to work with. Is this moving in the right direction?
It's definitely moving in the right direction, yes.
You've indicated that some changes have taken place as of late, and that you seem to see these as positive changes. Is it your opinion now that we are starting to move in the right direction to remedy some of the things that you called to our attention?
We've taken a very solid first step, as I've said in my testimony.
Well, I understand the solid first step, but I'm concerned about the direction.
Yeah.
Are we moving in the right direction?
Yes.
I know where we are, I know what we've done, and I know that Mr. Cordray has indicated a desire to remedy certain aspects of what has happened. In fact, he's indicated a desire to me to take affirmative action to remedy all of the negativism. But I want to make sure that you're of the opinion that we're starting to move in the right direction.
We are starting to, yes.
Okay. Now, I have from Mr. Cordray a letter. Mr. Chairman, I believe you've received a copy of the letter, and as well there is a performance management analysis, fiscal 2013. I'd like to introduce these things into the record with unanimous consent.
Without objection, they'll be entered into the record.
And, Mr. Chairman, you've been very liberal with your time, and I would ask one additional indulgence. I'd just like to give Ms. Strong an opportunity to explain why it is she did not have an opportunity to peruse this report. She's been quizzed on it, but she never had an opportunity to just state it. Would you give her an additional few seconds to do so, please?
Sure. If you'd address, there are two reports in question. The internal report the union was provided, and then the earlier Deloitte report. You may address both.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So I can't speak to the report that was prepared for the OMWI office, but the request for information from the union that revealed the performance distribution data was requested through my office, and we provided that information to the union, and I believe that was in January.
Was the OMWI, was the OMWI office aware that you put together that report, or that report for the union was routed through you?
You know, I'm not sure. I mean, it was a routine information request. We get information requests from the union all the time. My office acts as a conduit for those requests, so that we turn them over to our systems people. They pull the information from the system, give it back to us. We turn it over to the union.
But the OMWI office was not involved with the data you provided to the union?
So not initially, but after we offered the union an invitation to enter into a working group with the EEO office, OMWI, and Human Capital in reviewing that documentation.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, the OMWI report, would you give your representation as to why you were not privy to the report, please?
So I can't answer that question. I just have never seen it until today. It may have been circulated to my supervisor or someone higher than me in my organization, but I just haven't seen it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Yeah, well, I think it shows there's a problem that the lead union negotiator doesn't have that very important data provided by Deloitte. But Mr. Knopp, if you'd like to respond.
No, I mean, I think obviously, yes, it would have been helpful, and in the spirit of good faith bargaining, I think we should have seen it at a much earlier date.
Okay, thank you. And we'll now recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, who I should congratulate on the birth of his youngest daughter, number 7.
Number 7.
That's right. Congratulations.
Thank you. We like Marvin Gaye in Wisconsin, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that invites a comment from the ranking member. Let me compliment you as well. You have met your mandate to be fruitful and multiply.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Strong, obviously, as the labor and employee relations lead for the CFPB, you heard complaints from different employees of the CFPB about racism and sexism and maybe some ageism, right? You heard those complaints some time ago, yes?
So we, out of the 137 grievances that we've received, there's around, I think, 17 that have alleged some sort of discrimination.
But they come through you. You were aware of the complaints that came in, yes?
Yes.
Right. And as you said in your opening statement, you're a woman and a minority. When you hear about these allegations of sexism and racism, obviously you must take this very seriously, right?
Absolutely.
And so not only did you have the the complaints from employees. You also, in September of last year, had the DIG report, which I heard your testimony. You don't agree with that report, but there was also an outside investigation that told you that there was some issues as well with regard to racism in the CFPB, correct?
Those were the conclusions of that report.
That you disagree with, right?
That I just do not think that it was a complete report.
Fair enough. You're also aware that Deloitte was doing an investigation on this very issue that you care about because they asked you a few questions about it, right?
So it wasn't my understanding that it was an investigation. It was more of a, the question that was posed to me was, what does diversity mean to you? So I thought it was more of a study.
Fair enough. When did you learn that there was a Deloitte report that had been completed?
So this is the first time that I've seen this report.
Now, Ms. Strong, we all get the joke when you don't answer my question. I didn't ask you when you saw the report, which you told me you saw that today.
Yeah.
My question for you is, when did you know the report existed?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. I do not know.
So you knew before today, right?
I have never seen the report. I knew that there was some type of study, so I'm not trying to not be truthful in answering your question. It's just that I haven't seen the report. I did know that Deloitte was doing the study.
I know you didn't see it. Did you know that it existed a week ago?
No.
You didn't. You don't. So then 2 weeks ago, you didn't know it existed.
I don't believe so. No, I
You
haven't
don't recall?
reviewed it. So if I had an opportunity to review it, maybe that would trigger my memory.
Did you have a meeting with the staff of the committee?
Yes.
Before this hearing?
Yes.
And didn't they tell you that a report existed in that meeting? They told you that it existed 2 weeks ago. Yes?
Okay, maybe yes.
Yes.
I just don't recall
and
that.
So
I'm sorry.
2 weeks ago, you know the report exists. You know that you're going to come into this hearing and you're going to get questions about the report.
Yeah.
And when we ask you those questions, you tell us that you haven't read the report.
So my
and you
attorney-
mislead us and say, well, I didn't see the report.
I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be misleading. My
Well, you are.
attorney just said that they did not inform us of the report in that closed briefing.
You knew it existed. You didn't read the report, so you won't answer questions today about it. Let me ask you this. Mr. Knopp and the union has asked you for the report. They asked for it months ago.
They've never asked for this report. I'm sorry.
Or information in regard to this issue,
They've
right?
asked for information.
That are contained in the report. When did the CFPB provide the report to Mr. Knopp or the union?
When did the CFPB provide this? That they haven't.
They never did, right? The committee gave it to you, correct?
That's
the CFPB has never given you the report that contains the information that you've asked for. And the CFPB comes in today and goes, listen, we're on the front line trying to get rid of racism and sexism. But then you come in and won't answer our questions. You won't even give the union the report. We have to give it to them. And you want us to believe, as the lead negotiator, that you want to root out racism and sexism. If we want to accomplish that goal, you have to cooperate. Did you prepare for this hearing with leadership at the CFPB?
Yes.
Did they talk to you about how you should testify?
No.
So what was the conversation with the CFPB and how you should testify in preparation for this hearing?
They asked me practice questions to get me ready.
So they prepared you. They didn't go, Ms. Strong, go off the best of your recollection and tell the truth. Tell them what you know. Instead, you come in here and say, I saw the report today, but I never read it, even though I knew it existed weeks ago. So we can't ask you questions about it, and you don't give it to Mr. Knopp. And then you want us to believe that you care about this issue and you want to help on a bipartisan effort for us to resolve it. I'm sorry. I don't believe it. And when you start to be more credible and more forthcoming, I'll buy in. I yield back.
It's not true. I'm sorry.
We'll now recognize Mr. Hack for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this time, I'd like to yield my time to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Heck. Let's, Ms. Strong, continue with the report, and we're talking about the Omwe report. You indicated that you saw the report for the first time today, I believe. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that you did not have knowledge of this specific report. You knew that questions were being asked and a report was being compiled. Is this correct?
I knew that that the Amway office had contracted with Deloitte to do a study on diversity, and I was interviewed.
And you did not receive a copy of the report?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And not having a copy of the report and having not read it, you're not in a position to testify as to what the content
I am not.
is.
I think Stuart Ishamaro actually offered to come and speak with you, so he would be the appropriate person to talk through that report.
Would it be unusual for there to be other reports that you would not be privy to?
I don't think it would be unusual. I'm sure there are a lot of reports at the Bureau that I'm not privy to. I'm not a senior manager. I'm not an executive. I'm a first-level supervisor.
And would any indication that there was some intentionality with reference to your not giving information today, would that be incorrect because of your lack of knowledge about the report?
Yes, I did not have knowledge.
And I'm doing this because I'm trying to give you an opportunity to make it clear as to your lack of knowledge, and as a result of your lack of knowledge, your inability to give comments, as opposed to your knowing about this and your refusal to, in some way, impart information to others or to give testimony today.
That's correct. I'm just not the appropriate person to speak about this report because I didn't have anything to do with the report. But there is someone at the Bureau that would be happy to come and talk to you about it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
Thank you. And we will now go to Mr. Holkren of Illinois.
Mr. Chair, reclaiming my time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Gentlemen, how much time did the gentleman have remaining?
2 minutes and 55 seconds to be specific.
We'll put it back on the board at 3 minutes because we're being kind.
You're very kind, Mr. Chair. Ms. Strong?
Yes.
It's my understanding that committee procedures require you to attest to the veracity, at least of your written testimony here today. Do you affirm now and again that everything that you have submitted to this committee, you do so to the best of your knowledge and represents truth as best as you can recollect it?
Yes.
Thank you, and thank you for your presence here today.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. We'll now go to Mr. Holkren of Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for being here today. Ms. Strong, I want to follow up a little bit on talk about preparation here, meeting with leaders at CFPB to prepare, to go over questions, to go over answers. Wondered if Director Cordray would have been part of that, if you would have talked to him in that preparation.
Repeat the question, please.
Wondered if Director Cordray was part of your preparation for So he wasn't in those meetings at all? You never discussed this, your testimony today with Director Cordray?
No, sir.
Okay. Offering out to both of you, do you think that the removal of Dennis Slaughter from his role as Director of Human Capital was a positive step in correcting the problem of pay inequity and discriminatory performance ratings detailed in the March 6, 2014 American Banker article?
So it is my understanding that Mr. Slater was offered another position and accepted it. I don't think it had anything to do with the performance management rating distribution.
Do you think the fact that he is no longer there does help the fact of the pay inequity and discriminatory performance ratings?
I don't think that it has any impact on that.
Mr. Knopp, what's your thoughts?
I think, as my testimony referenced, management needs to hold itself accountable. From my dealings with Mr. Slater, there seemed to be a lack of sensitivity to these issues, and in several meetings I had with him, I think also a lack of urgency in addressing them. So I think he was reassigned. Perhaps that's a better fit for his skill set, because I do think there was an endemic problem in the human capital division that has led to a number of problems that we're talking about today.
So would you suggest that his removal and reassignment likely had something to do with the problems with the pay inequity and discriminatory performance ratings?
You know, I can't testify as to exactly what happened, but certainly the timing of it, several weeks after the American Banker article and the hearings you conducted, indicates that it potentially could be linked.
Ms. Strong, do you think Dennis Slater should be commended for a job well done at Human Capital?
Well, Dennis Slater was my supervisor for the majority of the time that I've been at the Bureau. I find him to be a very caring person that worked very hard to stand up CFPB from a human capital perspective.
So you would support the idea of commending him for a job well done at Human Capital?
I believe he did a good job.
How about you, Mr. Knopp? Would you think that that would be a good idea to commend him for a job well done at Human Capital?
I would not offer that proclamation, no.
Would you agree that there are serious problems with the Office of Human Capital? And it sounds like you've already stated that, Mr.
Yes. Yes, I will.
Ms. Strong, would you agree that there are serious problems with the Office of Human Capital?
No, I would not agree to that.
But you would say that pay inequity and discriminatory performance ratings are serious?
We take all grievances and complaints very seriously.
So discriminatory practice and pay inequity would be something that you take seriously and would lead, you would say that would be a serious problem?
Of course, we take all allegations of those.
My time is running out. Let me get to a couple other things quickly and focus these to Mr. Knopp. After providing the union with a report on 2013 performance reviews, which indicated sharp racial disparities in January 2014, wondered, did CFPB take immediate action to revise its performance management review process?
No, it did not.
What discernible action did CFPB take in January 2014 after the Bureau released data showing sharp racial disparities in performance ratings?
I believe there was a very general message sent by the director noting that this is a problem, but certainly we did not see a change in the posture of the Bureau in grievances nor in the collective bargaining process.
Is CFPB's union satisfied with CFPB's approach to resolving the outstanding issues with discrimination at the Bureau?
We are not completely satisfied by any means at this point, and a large part of that would have to do with the pay equity issues.
What could CFPB do to resolve the union's concerns about sharp racial disparities in performance ratings?
Well, I think we've discussed a lot of the remedies. I think Director Cordray's step was positive on Monday, but we need a new system. We're going to have that. We need more accountability. We really need, from the director on down, to make sure that managers are doing this fairly and hold those who don't accountable. And that's really all the union's been advocating for in general throughout the process.
But you haven't seen that yet?
Not yet.
My time has expired. I yield back. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
We'll now enter into the next round, which is Ms. Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to get a few things straight here, according to the March 6, 2014 American Banker article, the sharpest disparities in the performance ratings were seen amongst the staffers who had received the top rating of 5. The discrepancies were even greater at the ratings ranges extremes. And at the top, 1/5 of white employees, or some 20.7%, received a 5 and were dubbed role models, compared with 10.5% of African Americans and 9.1% of Hispanics. Why do you believe that the CFPB, Mr. Knopp, designated 20% of its white staff as role models and conferred this designation to only 10% of African Americans and Hispanic staff?
I think what those numbers proved to the union was that there was a disparate impact. And much like the Bureau would do in a fair lending case, it's almost a strict liability situation where once you see those numbers, the inquiry ends and the remedy section begins. So we focused on remediating the problem through grievances and through back pay and things like that. But the numbers, I think, speak for themselves.
Is there any, speaking of the numbers, is there any empirical data that CFPB had been able to produce to the union that would account for the ratings disparities?
No.
None. Is there any explanation that CFPB had been able to provide to the union to explain any of these disparities at all?
No.
So there was no empirical data to base these numbers? There was no explanation? Did CFPB management and Liza Strong state that CFPB's apparently discriminatory performance rating system exemplified a meritocracy?
I raised the issue probably sometime in February during our collective bargaining process. I raised it numerous times, fairly aggressively. and throughout was met with strong resistance to changing the system, including a question back to me whether I didn't believe in a meritocracy. So in essence saying that the current system was a meritocracy, which I found sadly
stunning,
humorous in a sad way.
Ms. Strong, did you or anyone else representing CFPB management refer to CFPB's discriminatory performance review system as a form of meritocracy?
No, I did not.
Maybe you two weren't in the same meeting. Given the data disclosed in the March 6th American Banking article, and this one that apparently is 8 months old and is just everybody's coming to light on here, the Deloitte report of September the 30th, that actually, let me be very specific, it identified diversity problems across the agency, including overrepresentation of minority and women employees in the lower pay scale groups. That's what this 8-month-old Deloitte study, as it's called, did. Ms. Strong, can you explain why CFPB employees should trust you and your office to look out for their interests and protect them from abuses of CFPB management?
Well, first of all, I don't think, or I have not been privy to any abuses by CFPB management. I look into the grievances that are brought to me.
I'm sorry, would you state that again? You have not, go ahead, seen?
So in the cases that I have worked on and the investigations I've conducted, I have not found any evidence of discrimination.
And one more time, you'd like to stand by that answer?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Knopp, do you believe CFPB's Human Capital Office generally, and Ms. Strong in particular, are doing everything in their power to address and resolve both specific workplace complaints as well as the underlying issues driving those complaints, sir?
No.
I would agree. Are you aware of a culture of retaliation and intimidation that discourages employees from submitting valid complaints or exposing wrongdoing at the CFPB?
We have seen instances of retaliation for a variety of reasons against union members, yes.
Do you share information about an employee's complaints with the very same manager they are complaining about?
I'm not sure I quite understand that question.
Is it going directly to that manager?
Well, unfortunately, the current system, yes, that would be the way it works, unfortunately.
So you have to share that directly with the current manager who has rated and been disparate directly against the employee.
Yes, that's one thing.
I want to make sure I get this for the record.
That's one thing we seek to change in the collective bargaining agreement going forward. I think you've identified a key problem in the structure of the grievance process.
I think we have. Do you understand how disclosing that information can lead to very easily to retaliation, sir?
Sure. It's human nature, I would say.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The ranking member passes, and we'll go to Mr. Barr of Kentucky for 5 minutes.
Mr. Knopp, just to follow up on something that we were exploring earlier, obviously the union, rather strike that, the Bureau at some point in time disclosed to the union that managers were rating themselves more highly than their own staff, and the union became aware of that when exactly?
The union became aware of that in September of 2013.
Okay. How did, as you represent the union, how did the Bureau respond to that?
Well, obviously, we voiced our displeasure with that. It kind of goes against most things the union stands for, and generally, it appeared to me there was some sort of unified front of just not discussing it, just not acknowledging it, and negotiating almost as it didn't happen.
To date, have they adequately addressed that issue in the eyes of the union?
Well, I think really Director Cordray's statement on Monday certainly addressed it, and I think that was the first time it's really been addressed head-on. So
first time since September, after this committee began to look into this issue, the Bureau is finally acknowledging this as of today?
As far as I know, yes, that is the first straight-on admission of fault. Yes.
Ms. Strong, you referred to Stuart Ishimaru. You have a professional relationship with Mr. Ishimaru at the Bureau, correct?
Correct.
And is he still the director or head of the Office of Women and Minority Inclusion?
Yes, he is.
And he has been in that position for how long?
I don't know exactly, a couple of years.
Okay, so as long as you've been there.
I've been there longer than him.
Okay. How many meetings do you have typically with Mr. Ishimaru at work?
We don't meet on a routine or regular basis. I would say I've met with him maybe 4 or 5 times. He's also been in meetings that other people have been in as well.
Your office is the Office of Human Capital, right?
That's correct.
And Mr. Ishimaru's office is the Office of Women and Minority Inclusion.
That's correct.
And both of those offices are within the Operations Division.
They were until recently, and the OMWE office was elevated to report directly to the director.
When did that happen?
I would say within the past 3 months.
Okay. Does Mr. Sartaj Alaj, is he still head of the division?
He is the coup.
Yeah. So does he organize meetings where there's communication among the various offices within the division?
I'm sure he does. I just don't attend them.
You're not part of those.
That's correct.
In the 4 or 5 occasions where you're telling me that you've only spoken with Mr. Ishimaru 4 or 5 times in your entire.
That's a guess, but yes, somewhat.
That's about right.
Right.
And in those 4 or 5 conversations, not once in the last 8 months was the Deloitte report ever brought to your attention.
No, sir.
You were aware of the Deloitte report being in Mr. Ishimaru's office. You knew that.
Yeah, I was interviewed.
But there was never a discussion between you and Mr. Ishimaru
I was never
related to
briefed
that.
on this report.
In your management of the investigation of employee grievances, have you ever come across allegations that employees within the Office of Consumer Response referred to a division as the plantation?
I had not heard that before the April 2nd hearing.
That was the very first time you had ever heard that.
That was the very first time.
What about? Did you not hear about that in Ms. Rauchi's report?
No, that was not in her report.
Okay, did you ever hear of any other kinds of, in your investigations of employee grievances, any other allegations of gender or racial discrimination?
I have received some grievances that have alleged, for example, that an individual's performance rating was lower based on their race.
Okay.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Knopp, regarding Angela Martin, Ms. Strong testified and said some very direct things about her case. Do you believe Ms. Martin to be truthful in her allegations?
Every allegation I've heard Ms. Martin make, I have no reason to believe it's untruthful.
Do you believe that she suffered retaliation?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Have you actually been retaliated upon?
Me personally?
Yes.
I think, I didn't file a grievance or anything on it, certainly, so it's not a formal complaint, but I think generally the CFPB was a little slow to embrace the idea that we were a union and we were going to act like a union and represent employees vigorously. And I think there was some blowback from managers who had no experience in working in that type of environment that certainly I felt.
All right. Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll accept my 5 minutes. Mr. Knopp, you just made comments about a certain case, and I've tried to stay away from specific cases, but your comments invite my concerns. You Did you investigate this case yourself? Do you have some empirical evidence to support your claim?
I read the report, obviously.
Did you investigate was my question.
I didn't, of course, no, I did not do the
You
investigation.
did not. I assumed as much, but I want the record to reflect what the facts are. And in understanding that you did not investigate, am I to understand that you did not talk to people on both sides of the issue, that you did not talk to persons who can give you intelligence about both sides without bringing names into it? Is that a fair statement?
No.
Did you talk to people on both sides?
I talked to the person sitting next to me about
No.
Well, I mean, she was representing the
people
bureau.
associated with a specific case that was mentioned. I've tried to refrain from mentioning names, but people associated with that case. Did you talk to people on both sides of it?
I have had discussions with people on both sides of that, yes.
About that specific case?
I believe so, yes.
So you have investigated then?
I wouldn't call it an investigation. It would be more of, trying to reach...
Did you talk to people who disagreed with the contentions of the complainant?
Sure.
Did you have reason to disbelieve them?
I thought the report was fairly convincing, and I've reviewed certainly many aspects of Angela Martin's case personally because I've represented her on a grievance.
My question was,
I believe it.
Did you have reason to disbelieve the persons who gave you information that was antithetical to the testimony that we received here? Did you talk to people who gave you another opinion?
Yeah, I actually think I did have reason to disbelieve them. Yeah.
What was the reason?
The report, for one.
Well, not the report. I'm asking you about what you did and what you found out yourself. You see, we have the report.
Okay.
And you have given your opinion. And your opinion, I want to find out if it's based upon something associated with empirical evidence. Is it associated with empirical evidence, or are these just your thoughts based upon things that you've picked up along life's way, as it were?
Well, I don't think Angela Martin's case really dealt with necessarily empirical evidence. So, no, my beliefs on her case would not be empirically based necessarily.
Thank you. Now, let's go to disparate impact. That is a theory that has been accepted and embraced by many courts. In fact, the Supreme Court of the United States of America has embraced the theory. And it has been embraced, apparently, by this committee. My hope is that in future testimony, we will find that this theory finds the same degree of validity that it has found today and has found on previous occasions. I'm a person who believes that you have to be consistent to the extent that you can. We all have inconsistencies in our lives. But to the extent that you can be consistent, you should. And if you're going to embrace disparate impact as it relates to this agency, my hope is that your union would believe that it would be appropriate for other agencies as well. Is that a fair statement?
I think we believe in the principle of disparate impact, yes.
And would you agree that if you have some evidence that is based upon disparate impact, that this would be something that you should call to my attention?
Yes, I do.
Are you indicating today that you are free to do this? Can you call these things to my attention?
I would be honored to, yes.
And I would be honored to receive any intelligence that you have connoting or indicating disparate impact so that we may give all persons the same opportunity to be heard that we've accorded some people in this circumstance. Now, finally, this. You've indicated that there's a remedy that's being imposed that deals with the pay circumstance. You've indicated that you're working now on a remedy that deals with the way this these evaluations will take place in the future. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you've indicated that you seem to be moving in the right direction. You're not where you want to be, but is this the way unions work? Do you start at one point and do you try to graduate to a final point that is acceptable to the union and other parties as well? Is this a fair statement?
Yes.
So you are now working with the agency. Are you working directly with Mr. Cordray?
We have quarterly meetings with the director, yes.
And as such, you are moving in the right direction Not where you want to be, but moving in the right direction.
I think that's right.
Thank you.
Well, I'll recognize Mr. Duffy for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had quite a few hearings on the discrimination at the CFPB, and during one of those hearings, it was brought to our attention that a unit at the CFPB that predominantly had African American employees was oftentimes referred to as the plantation or the cesspool. Ms. Strong, were you aware that this unit or agency was, or this unit was referred to by those terms?
No, sir.
Okay. Is this the first time you've heard that those terms have been used for a unit within the CFPB?
No, I heard that in the April 2nd hearing. That was the first time I had heard it.
But before that, you didn't know?
No, I did not.
Mr. Knopp, have you heard these terms being used for a specific unit within the CFPB?
I certainly have heard for basically a year since the union's been in existence, extremely unhappy employees in consumer response who seem to have justified complaints, and they did seem to revolve in many cases around race. The first time I believe I heard that actual term was with Ms. Martin's testimony.
Okay. And again, Ms. Strong, you're at the tip of the spear in regard to employee relations between employees and management, right? I mean, the labor and employee relations person.
Yeah, I'm the lead of labor and employee relations.
And did not know this was taking place.
No, that was never reported to me.
And again, in your statement, you told us that you care about women and you care about minorities because you are both yourself. And I don't want to beat a dead horse, but you knew that the Deloitte report had come out. And as a person who cares about women and minorities, are you telling us today that you cared so much about women and minorities that you had no interest in reading the investigation that was provided by Deloitte? And even today, as you sit here, you had no interest in reading it?
No, it's just that I wasn't provided a copy of it, so I did not have the opportunity to review it. And I didn't know that it existed. I knew that a study was being done, but I didn't know there was a product that came out of it.
Your testimony in my prior round, you said you did know about it 2 weeks ago, and that you didn't have a copy. Does that mean that you couldn't have received a copy?
No, actually, I said that was not true. I'm sorry, I said that was not true.
After you consulted with your lawyer, but first you told me that you did see it. So, or
No,
you also
no,
told me you also told me that you don't.
You said that it was brought up in that meeting, and I said I'm not sure, but it was clarified that it was not.
I was very clear that you indicated you have no independent recollection of whether you knew it existed or not until today, and you haven't seen it. So Mr. Knopp, you've heard Mrs. Strong's comments today about her lack of review of a report that's pretty damning to the agency, so she can't answer questions today at this hearing. Do you think there is concern within the employee body at the CFPB in regard to the trust of Ms. Strong as the lead of employee relations with management?
I think currently, because of these problems that we're discussing here today and others, there's a lot of distrust between various aspects of management and labor. I think human capital has certainly played a role in that.
Do you think that after this hearing,
yes,
as the spokesperson for labor at the CFPB, do you think they probably feel a lot better about Ms. Strong and the position that she holds? A lot more confident in her?
I think there will be, our continued position will be there's a lot of work to be done, and
do they feel better about her today after this?
Do I? I actually like Lisa Strong. We've worked together on a lot of things. We see each other. We see issues though differently in many cases, and I have felt that workers have not been getting a fair shake from human capital. So
is that fair to say that they haven't been getting a fair shake from Mrs. Strong?
She's the second sort of rung supervisor of human capital. So of course my that would indicate my displeasure with that, with her as well.
Yeah, so just to clarify my role is to assist managers in responding to grievances. Ultimately, it's the manager's decision on how to respond to a grievance. We give them recommendations and guidance, but it is not my role to make or render decisions on grievances.
I want to do one quick question. You do see cases come in on grievances from the union, right, Ms. Strong?
Yes.
And in those grievances, roughly how many have there been?
There have been about 137.
And how many of those grievances have you sided with the union as opposed to management?
So I don't know the exact numbers, but I believe we are pending resolution or have resolved 50, but there are still some that are still in the process.
So 50 plus have been sided in favor of the union?
Correct.
Mr. Knopp, do you agree with that?
I don't think the siding in favor of the union would be. I think there was settlement reached, but for a long time, I think the denial rate was hovering around 90%. So there's been quite a bit of change in that in the last, several weeks.
All right.
Since we started the oversight, I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Well, I'll take my 5 minutes for this round. Ms. Strong, have any supervisors received counseling for making racially insensitive or remarks or using racial epithets?
Yes.
Okay. What remarks or racial epithets are you aware of?
So I guess I don't feel very comfortable.
Actually, I'm not comfortable with you saying them, but you're aware of what they said?
Yes.
Okay. In order to resolve the grievance, you had to be aware of what they said, right? The circumstances?
So it wasn't a grievance.
It wasn't? Okay.
Well, maybe it was first raised in a grievance. I'm sorry.
So what disciplinary action has been taken against those supervisors who made racially insensitive remarks or used racial epithets?
There was a manager who made a comment to an employee in a performance discussion that the manager did not feel or intend to have it come out that way. That manager was counseled. How
many managers have made racially insensitive remarks or used racial epithets?
That's the only one that I can recall.
That's one circumstance or two?
That's one.
That's one. Okay. And what was the remediation? What was the punishment?
They were counseled.
They were counseled. Okay. Okay. So, and they're still in their same position today?
Correct.
Do you know in the performance review process if they got high marks?
I do not know.
Okay. And under the provisions that Director Cordray outlines, if he did not receive high marks, he will be compensated as if he did get high marks. Is that correct?
My understanding is that all employees will be compensated as though they received a 5-level rating.
Even somebody who, a what rating?
A 5-level rating.
Out of how many?
Out of 5 levels.
So everyone is now superior under the conclusion of this. Is that right, Mr. Knopp? Is that how you see it?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Okay. And is the union's position that that is satisfactory, that resolves the issue with performance reviews?
Certainly doesn't resolve the whole issue, but it's certainly the first acknowledgement there were problems, and we think that's a good building block for going forward.
So, Mr. Knopp, I want to ask this because, I was here during the creation of the CFPB on this committee. Mm-hmm. And are you surprised at, or how's the approach been between the union and management? Because as far as I saw it, the unions were key and instrumental in the creation of the CFPB. I mean, you could quibble with that if you wish, but so has the welcome been warm?
Well, first, I think but for labor unions, we wouldn't have a CFPB. I think the CFPB was very welcoming to us in the organizing effort. But when we actually organized, I think they might have been a little surprised that a union was actually acting like a union.
Have they been heavy-handed in their response to you?
I think there were instances of heavy-handedness, and it's been an adjustment change. I think, as the ranking member put it, not everything is Rome wasn't built in a day. We understand that. However, that being said, I do think the CFPB could have been certainly more collaborative and given put the union on equal footing, and we didn't see that for a long time.
So let me ask you back to the question, the series of questions I had for you, Ms. Strong. We provide in writing who the supervisor was and the circumstances under which they used the racially insensitive or racial epithet.
So,
will you provide in writing who the supervisor was?
Can I provide in writing?
Will you provide, not can, will you provide to this committee in writing who that was and the circumstances under which it was
Sure,
done?
I'd be happy to come and brief on the specifics of that.
So your legal counsel, as you're entitled as a CFPB employee, your legal counsel is being paid for by yourself or the agency?
So I've requested reimbursement through our indemnification policy.
And have you been granted that?
Yes.
Mr. Knopp, likewise, did you request repayment of legal counsel?
I did not even get to that point. I was told pretty
Why?
clearly. Well, I was told pretty clearly that I would not be indemnified, so I did not retain an attorney.
Do you believe that that is some level of retaliation?
It certainly didn't strike me as a fair approach, as we're both Bureau employees and both privy to the same information.
Okay. Well, it seems as if that this committee and what we've aired today, we know a lot more about employee relations than you do, Ms. Strong. And so it's surprising to me that you're not provided this Deloitte report. Do you believe that's problematic?
You know, I don't know. I mean, I see.
Will you respond in writing whether or not you believe it's problematic after reviewing the report that's before you?
I'll tell you that I definitely will read it now.
Well, I would certainly appreciate it, and before you engage in negotiations, you should look at this data. It's damning. So, gentlemen, my time's expired, and the ranking member?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to have just a couple of comments and questions, if I may, please.
We're going into a third round, so we'll give you
Okay.
5 minutes. Gentleman strikes the last word. Is recognized.
I don't think I'll need 5, Mr. Chairman. But I do want to have you indicate whether managers are a part of this remedy that is being imposed. The question was phrased such that you included all persons at the CFPB receiving the bonuses based upon a 5. And my question to you is, did this include managers as well?
I do not believe it includes senior level managers at the assistant director level or above, is my understanding.
And do you agree with this, Mr. Knopp?
Yeah, I agree with her statement.
Thank you. Mr. Knopp, a question was posed to you about your feelings, as it were, as they relate to Ms. Strong. And you indicated that where she is in the chain of command, as it were. Let me ask you now, are you indicating that you think that the employees at the CFPB have some animus as it relates to Ms. Strong?
I think certain employees certainly do.
Certain employees?
Yes.
All right. Is that to include, for my purposes, all employees, which would mean that I would assume that you would say no?
No, not all.
And let me ask you this, just for clarity, there are certain employees who probably don't think highly of you. Is that a fair statement?
I'm sure there are.
Okay. But that wouldn't mean that all.
No.
All right. And finally, Ms. Strong, you're not here to represent the CFPB today, are you? Are you the spokesperson for the CFPB today? Or did you come here to represent your station and what you have done there?
The latter.
Which?
The latter, sir.
So you're not here to represent the agency?
No, sir. The director offered to come himself. I know that Stuart Ishamaro offered many times to come, and both of those offers were declined.
Mr. Chairman, I want to give back more than 3 minutes of time.
And I'll just want to I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes, and then we'll end this thing. And I appreciate the witnesses being here today, even under the circumstances being compelled. I appreciate your willingness to answer both sides of the aisle. There are questions. What we found today is interesting. Ms. Strong, you've been less than forthcoming in terms of how you've answered questions today, and that I believe is problematic. But I do want to ask you, this Deloitte report, which is done by the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion, it's a diversity and inclusion assessment dated from September of last year. Do you think that that information could have been helpful to you doing your job?
I don't know. I haven't reviewed it. So
Okay. Would you respond in writing to that after you review it?
No.
You'll not respond in writing to whether or not you believe it would be helpful to have this information?
Excuse me for one moment.
Your lawyer is nodding and
On my
shaking his head.
attorney's advice, no, I would not.
Okay. Well, I certainly appreciate your assertion of your rights to not respond to that. So would you find it problematic to know that in page 13 of this report, the conclusion is, further examination reveals that the minority population is overrepresented in the lower pay bands and underrepresented in the higher pay bands, which is masked in the Bureau level data. Would that information have been helpful to you in doing your job?
So I haven't had a chance to read the report, so I wouldn't be able to comment on that.
Specifically, minority composition in pay bands 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s are approximately 10% below the Bureau level minority composition as well. Do you think that is helpful data, useful data in your negotiations with the union about the issue of minorities being discriminated against and paid disparities within the Bureau?
I would have the same answer. I wouldn't be able to respond without thoroughly reviewing this report.
Okay. So, again, less than forthcoming in your answers and unwilling to engage here. Mr. Knopf.
Certainly not my intent.
But it is the result of your actions. It may not be your intent, but it is certainly the result of your actions. Mr. Knopf, in terms of negotiating, who do you negotiate with the Bureau? As head of the union for the chapter for the...
Certainly Lisa's involved in the actual collective bargaining agreement negotiations, several other attorneys.
Okay. Do you believe that what you've heard today means that she's a fully informed party to negotiate with?
Does not believe she's fully informed. I do not believe she's fully informed.
Okay.
No.
And the withholding of this important report from the person you're negotiating with, that to me would not give you greater assurances. Do you believe that it gives you greater assurances or less assurance that the Bureau is being forthright in producing data so that you can negotiate with them in good faith?
It certainly would not give us greater assurances, yes.
Okay. Well, this hearing is problematic. The origin of it, we have both data and individual examples of discrimination and retaliation. And so I think it's important that we follow up with this. We're going to have additional questions for both of you. And so we'll now, without objection, each side, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witnesses. I ask the witnesses to please respond as promptly as they are able. And I'd like to thank the witnesses for their testimony today. And without objection, the hearing is adjourned.